There's an issue in modeling, and it's excessive tedium. I'm sure you've experienced it before. You have a crappy low poly mesh that you wish could become a beautiful subdivision, perfect baking mesh. But alas, you cannot get that for free. Or can you? Okay, so we're here at my low poly mesh, and this is what most things look like when they're not subdivided. But we're gonna start with this piece right here, because this piece is a really good example of this. So this piece is a 𝓺𝓾𝓪𝓵𝓲𝓽𝓂 mesh. There's no holding edges. The topology is complete throwaway topology. I put next to no effort into maintaining the topology of this mesh or making sure that it made any sense. All I wanted was to create a certain set of shapes, and I did that, and that's why it looks this way. So what we're gonna do is we're going to take this mesh, and with doing next to no modeling whatsoever, we're going to make it a high poly mesh that has smooth edges and looks really nice. Right, if we try to just subdivide this, it turns into a blobby mesh, and that's pretty much useless to us. So we're gonna be making this mesh airtight, which means closing up all the holes within the mesh. We don't have to do this, but the method we're using will do it for us automatically, and it doesn't do it particularly cleanly. So if we do it ourselves ahead of time, it's gonna give us better results. Okay, so I've closed in the holes on both sides of this mesh, mirrored it. It's nice and clean. It's airtight now. What we're gonna do next is we're going to add a modifier in the generate tab that is called remesh. Remesh is a simple modifier. It essentially, the way I like to think of it working is that you're turning a mesh into a volume. So it's actually creating a volume out of the mesh, and then it's taking those voxels, because volumes are typically a bunch of little voxels that have a density value to them, and which is the voxel size you can see here. So we're taking that volume and we're essentially turning it back into a mesh. So there's different methods of voxelization and remeshing in this case. One of them is literally voxels, which we will take the voxel size, which you can see here. It's really just a bunch of cubes. We can make it smaller even. Let's go down even more. The more we subdivide this, the smaller the voxels are gonna get. This method is not what we're looking for, but it can be useful for many things. Sharp tries to maintain the actual edge flow of the model. This is the one we're gonna be using. Smooth turns the mesh into a blobby mess. This is good for organic objects, but is not what we're using now. And blocks just makes the mesh Minecraft. So we're not gonna be using that either. Back to sharp, we're gonna increase the octree depth until we get enough detail in the model. So for me, 9 steps is pretty solid, but we could probably take it all the way up to 10, just to make sure we have enough geometry when it comes to the smoothing phase. And we're gonna change this to smooth shading as well. And then I'm going to turn off the wireframe for a minute. So what you can see is our mesh has been remeshed quite cleanly, but it's really high poly now. You could attempt to subdivide this mesh. We're working with 2.3 million triangles. If you subdivide this mesh at this point, it's gonna be really heavy on your computer, so I would avoid doing that. Instead, we're gonna add a modifier from the deform tab this time called smooth corrective. What smooth corrective does is it's gonna soften up the edges of our mesh a little bit. We're gonna set it to only smooth, so that's all it's gonna do for us. And as you can see, it's kind of relaxed those edges that were created by the remesh modifier. We can repeat the amount of steps that smooth corrective actually goes through. So this is how many times it's going to smooth the mesh to get a much cleaner surface. Change the shading method to smooth shading to make it even cleaner looking. And as you can see right now, we have a relatively clean looking mesh. Sometimes you'll get artifacts like this. These artifacts are actually okay. They won't cause many issues unless you're working with like a 16K resolution texture map. You won't see these on most normal maps. But if they do bother you, you can go up another octree and you can repeat your smoothing steps a couple more times and pull out as many of them as possible. Note, the more times you repeat smoothing steps, the more soft your corners are gonna get. So this looks good, and if we turn off our cavity masking, which is just so that you can see better, the mesh looks really clean. Yeah, it took us pretty much zero effort whatsoever to go from a low poly n-gon mesh that I put almost zero thought into modeling and turn it into something that's perfect for doing your bakes with. Now, this is 2 million triangles plus at the moment, which is still a little bit heavy for your baking software, and it's going to be a pain to save out and whatnot. So we're going to add one more modifier from the generate tab called decimate. What decimate does is it, depending on where there is a density of detail, it's going to add a bunch of different size triangles to try and reduce the topology of the mesh to something that's really manageable. So for us, because this is 2.3, almost 2.4 million polygons, we maybe want to get this down to like 25, 30K. So I'm going to do 0.02 ratio, which is the percentage of the current poly count it's going to reduce this to. And then we'll give that a couple seconds to finish up calculating. All right, it's been less than 15 seconds, and you can see we have decimated our mesh. This is what the decimation looks like. You can check it for errors, but as long as your surface normals read correctly, then you're probably good. Doesn't look like I'm getting errors at the moment. I can tell you right now that if you take this into Substance Painter and bake with it, you'll probably get a pretty damn clean bake. That's the easy method. That's the method we used on the majority of this mesh. It will get expensive if you do it on something this large, which I did do. So this entire piece of this sword was remeshed using that method, which meant I can model it freely, not worry about my topology at all, and then eventually voxelize it. Now, it ended up getting to somewhere near 30 million polygons before I smoothed it out and before I decimated it. So that decimation step takes a pretty good amount of time if you're working from that high of a poly count. I recommend, if you're using this method, to try and keep your pieces of your mesh low, so you're not working with a chunk of a mesh this huge in general, because again, decimating it is going to take exponentially longer the more polygons it has to calculate. All right, I hope these tips helped you out. I'll be posting more in the future regarding Blender workflows, Substance Painter workflows, Substance Designer workflows, and possibly even some ZBrush tips as well. Also, if you'd like to see some more of my work, I'll be posting things in line with this sword and the full process video behind creating it to my channel soon. All right, have a good one. Peace.